and welcome to the President's Podcast right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm John Fortney, the Director of Communication with the Senate Republican Caucus, that is the majority caucus in the Ohio Senate. Great to have back on the program, the President's Podcast, of course, Ohio Senate President Rob McCauley. Senator Shane Wilkin from Hillsborough, Ohio, who is the chairman of the Public Utilities Commission, and Senator Bill Reineke, whose bill this week passed 21st century sweeping energy policy, really setting us up for the 21st century with his bill, and he is from Tiffin, Ohio. Thanks a lot for your time today. Well, let's start with Senator Reineke. Your Senate bill, which was numbered two, right, because it was one of our priority bills, was passed basically unanimously. The vote was 32-0 or 31-0. I can't remember exactly which, but really it targets a 21st century energy policy in four main areas. What are those?
So the basics of the bill, and I think why we were able to pass it with the majority we did, was that it focused on consumer costs. It focused on supply or reliability. It focused on elimination or reduction of barriers for people to have generation in Ohio, and then also focused on the free market system.
Yeah, reliability, accountability, and affordability. Senator Wilkin.
Yeah, it's a really good bill. We've got the opportunity to bring in behind the meter generation.
And what is that exactly?
So if there's a business that is a large energy user and they are concerned about being able to get connected to the grid, if they have the means to bring in combined cycle gas generator behind the meter, so it serve them directly, they're going to have the ability to do that. And there's some people that may say, yeah, but is that really going to happen? And just prior to starting, I told both the president and Senator McCauley, the president and Senator Reineke, that the PUCO dropped off to me a notification letter for 400 megawatts of gas generation in Fayette County behind the meter already.
So there is a need for this without a doubt. We were somewhat behind the curve in Ohio with a lot of natural resources, and now we are poised to act and really take a major leap into the 21st century.
Yeah, the beauty of this is that we can use Ohio natural resources and the natural gas that's right underneath our own soil to create Ohio energy for Ohio jobs. We have a unique competitive advantage over other states in being able to have all elements of that chain that leads to greater economic development. And that's the importance of this, is that we're opening the door for more natural gas generation and saying we will embrace that as the energy future of the state of Ohio.
It's always good to have a project and a plan, and people have ideas to build new baseload power, but it really doesn't help if it takes 12 years to get there. Doesn't this incentivize in many ways speeding up the process to get it to the market?
It does. And in fact, the thing that will result in the most generation being beneficial in the nearest term is the behind the meter generation. So the generation that would typically connect to the grid will have to go through a process at PJM, which we've talked about before is our 13 state plus Washington, D.C. Grid operator that really controls whether you can connect to the grid and put that energy on the grid. But if it's behind the meter and somebody is generating their own power and not taking off the grid, that is not subject to PJM approval. So that's really just subject to the Ohio Power Siting Board, who can approve those projects much quicker than what you would see with the PJM. So that's something that I would expect to see combined cycle natural gas plants up and running within the next 2 years.
And also reducing the tax burden as well, something called TPP on new power projects or new generation projects. I guess, first of all, what is TPP and why is it helpful to then apply that to the new rate to new generation?
Well, it's significant because the tangible personal property, or the TPP, is kind of a regressive tax of bygone years, and we don't really have it in place too much except on projects that have already been in place for many, many years. So we've drawn a line in the sand. Anything new, no new tax. Anything in the past, we are not screwing with it. We're not going to change it or adjust it so it can continue making everybody whole, the school systems and everything. But it's been a very important thing for us is to put no new taxes forward.
One of the things too, Senator Wilkin, people want to know, well, what is my bill going to look like? What are you doing for me, the consumer? And one of the key parts of Senate Bill 2 addresses something called ESP, right, which is otherwise known as a rider. How is that addressed, and why is the reform under the bill better?
So in past, utility could come in for a rate case and get their rates set at, we'll use simple round numbers, get their rate set at $10. Once they get that rate instituted, then they could come in for an ESP that would include different riders, and they say, hey, we want to do these efficiencies to help our customers.
And get their money back, though, right?
Yes, they're always going to get their recovery and rate of return. The key to the riders is they may say, hey, this rider is going to make everything more efficient, and we'll save people $2, but it's going to cost X number of dollars to do it. So if the PUCO grants that, then they come back and say, all right, we're going to give you the $55 million it costs to do this. Plus, we're going to give you a rate of return, 6, 8, 9%, whatever that may be determined by the PUCO. The catch is, if that saves the utility money based off their base rates, if their base rates would now go down because of this efficiency, the way the ESPs were set up is that was never looked at. So if I was charging you 10, I'm going to save myself 2, and I'm getting paid back and a rate of return for all of that. And therefore your bill went to 12. Well, instead of making 10 to 12, I'm making from 8 to 12. So it was you could game the system a little bit, and this bill fixes that.
Back to more of a true rate case where companies have to open the books. Is that correct, President McCauley?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And so public utilities, so electric companies, for example, AEP, First Energy, Duke, they are regulated utilities, meaning in order for them to charge you anything, it needs to be approved by the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. And to what Senator Wilkin just said, there were various ways to operate outside of rate cases where you'd have to open your books and the PUCO would have to actually have you true up what you should actually be charging for your rates. These riders allowed you to do that outside of the rate-making process typically. And many of these companies had avoided coming in for rate cases for, in some cases, over a decade because of the fact that they realized, well, we can just continue living off of these riders and not have to go in and go through a full audit of our books that sets our rates. That's going to change with this bill because of the elimination of riders altogether and with the requirement that these rate cases happen once every 3 years for these electric distribution utilities. And so there's going to be more accountability. There's going to be a more frequent true up of what the rates should actually be. And in that process, there's going to be more transparency as well.
And then, Senator Reineke, would the consumer be able to get a refund or a credit on their bill if a company says, well, it's going to be $100 million for us to do this upgrade, and then it winds up only costing them, let's say, $75 million? Is there a $25 million credit, for example, going back to the consumer?
Yes, that would be correct. It would go back. It would be a credit on their bill as they look forward to the next time also.
So there really is a cost savings there to the consumer, the way that works. One of the things we talk a lot about on this program is regulatory red tape and how long it takes for the wheels of government to actually come to some solution, especially within the executive branch, the Utilities Commission, for example. Does this not address the length of time for some of these cases to be adjudicated?
It does. I think. Well, it's important for a couple of things. Our utilities, they want certainty. They want to know what they can expect. But the other thing it helps us with is we don't want to have a situation where a utility is charging something that later the Supreme Court deems illegal, an illegal charge, and then you get into the fight over refunds. So by putting a shot clock on the PUCO and stating that you have until X day to make a decision, that's going to be a help to not only the consumer, but the utilities as well. And I think you'll find, in addition to what Senator Reineke had just said, where you get the credit back on that $25 million, the interest you earned off that $25 million you were collecting that you shouldn't have collected, you get that back too. So it's a really good comprehensive look. And, I think everybody involved really took a lot of time and tried to really make it good, as fair a bill as we possibly can.
One of the things that go ahead.
So I was just going to say currently it's average of 540 days, and in statute we put 365 days. That was one of the biggest things with the Ohio Business Roundtable and different people coming to Ohio is we've got to have this moved up the approval process.
You would think that a whole year would be a very reasonable time for these types of cases to be solved. Also, we've talked about Senate Bill 2 in the past being really an environmentally friendly, green type of bill. Not only does it maximize and capitalize on Ohio's natural gas reserves, but also it addresses and incentivizes some of these brownfield areas. Is that correct, Senator Reineke?
We have was suggested that we have a priority investment area, which is exactly what you're talking about, which would be including brownfields and those kinds of spaces that they would have an accelerated time period for approval, but also they would have a 0% on the transmission tax rate, and then it would go to 25% after the 5 years.
That's an important point for this bill to really address because there's a lot of these cleanup areas, President McCauley, that are still vacant, and they might be a good site to put a natural gas plant on.
Yeah, so brownfields generally are fields or pieces of land, rather, that have no suitable use for other types of typical development. And so you look, for example, down in southeast Ohio, you may have a coal mine that really doesn't have much other use that could potentially be used for electricity generation, in some cases even a solar field, given that it has no other use. Or even a natural gas plant as well. And so being able to say that these are not parcels of land that are going to be used for other forms of commercial development, but it is something that could be used in electricity generation, and allowing that to be reflected in the expedited time frame is something that will help get more electrons on the grid.
There was also, of course, the media is always very interested in the whole OVEC subsidy, the Ohio Valley Electric Cooperative, the two power plants down along the Ohio River. And one of my things in talking about that, well, this was something that was happening 6 years ago, and there was truly a real concern out there. If you take the generation capacity of two plants off the grid, what happens to Ohio? But now Senate Bill 2 actually repeals that subsidy, and it's a different age. It's a different time, and we're moving forward from the old news of 6 years ago to where we are today. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think you have to look at where we were 6 years ago relative to today. The subsidies that OVEC was getting were subsidies and a rider that they were already getting approved through the PUCO. They, through legislation, were allowed to get it by statute instead of having to go to the PUCO in an effort to make sure that those plants remained open. The environment has changed. The demand signals that are going out for power generation and to put more power on the grid, the capacity markets and everything associated with it are getting a higher price now. And so we are able to look at those plants and say they are going to continue operating without subsidy. And so it's important for us, and on behalf of the ratepayers and the citizens of Ohio, to evaluate whether we should have the subsidy at all, given the amount of money that they're able to sell power for now.
Well, you know, Senator Wilken, I'm a Southeast Ohio guy. I grew up in coal country down that way, and I became very concerned on a personal level watching a lot of the coal mines go away, the decommissioning of coal-powered plants. And, of course, there was a lot of investment as well into making those smokestacks a lot cleaner. And I was concerned about just major generation capacity, but it seems like some of those very same plants, I can think of one along Route 7 outside of Marietta, there's now a natural gas plant just to the north of there. So are we going to be a net exporter of energy in Ohio? Like we could be one of the top states for energy exporter.
Well, I wanted to say that a bit earlier. I think this bill really sets the table to put us in the driver's seat for PJM for electric generation. We have the opportunity with all the natural gas that the president spoke about, the preferred sites that Senator Reineke spoke about. We have some old coal plants that may be closed, the old DP&L plants that are down on the river. Well, guess what's still there? To the best of my knowledge, all of the infrastructure, all the wires going are still there. Could we put in a gas plant? If we can get gas there, could we do that? In my district, I have the A plant. The A plant has not only a PJM, which is what we're part of, interconnect, but I just learned not terribly long ago, there's also a MISO, which is another regional transmission organization. Kind of the Midwest goes from Canada all the way to the Gulf of America. that there's an interconnect there as well. So we have an opportunity to provide power to a large portion of the country, and that really puts us in a spot where I'm hoping we get the generation in here where, yes, we are an exporter.
Yeah, there is a need. Hey, listen, if you live in a state where power is very expensive and you're basically going to the alternative forms of energy, those solar and wind, there's a significant need of power from states like ours then to serve those areas. So there's a market there regardless. Final thought before I move to the transportation bill that was also passed unanimously this week, on just when do you think we'll be starting to see the benefits of Senate Bill 2 once the energy policy is passed in the House and signed into law? I mean, will there be somewhat of a lag, but do you think a year later we might be seeing some real benefits from that to consumers even?
My opinion is that we'll be seeing it relatively soon, maybe within 90 days or so, as far as applications starting to come in and conversation. We've already hearing about conversation. People are excited about what we've done. And of course, now we got to finish this out with the House and see where we're at. But I think we're going to see more immediate responses because of what we've done with taxation. Pipelines have always been an issue. We lowered the taxation on that. And with the transmission and with generation. The biggest thing we did, as far as what people tell me, is we separated generation from transmission. So making it for people who are not involved with transmission to be the only generators. So people who weren't sure where they were at on this now know that we're open for business.
What do you think, President McCauley?
Well, I think we'll start seeing an immediate benefit to this. Well, I shouldn't say immediate, but a near-term benefit to this in the self-generators and the large-scale investments that are going to be made once this signal gets sent out to the development community. I think you're also going to see, as soon as companies go in for rate cases, many of these riders are going to go away pretty quickly. And so I would suspect that their rate cases filings, they're going to adjust to this pretty quickly. And we'll see how it ends up after that process plays out.
From Senate Bill 2 to House Bill 54, an $11.5 billion two-year transportation bill that the Senate passed this week, also unanimously. We want to also tout the fact there is no tax increase on gas or diesel, correct?
That is correct. The gas and diesel tax rate remains unchanged.
What are some of the other key parts of this bill that you think that sometimes are overlooked? You know, people notice things though, like potholes in springtime. But what are some of the key parts of the bill that you want to point out?
Well, any transportation budget is really, so we collect gas tax every time you go to the pump and you fill up with a gallon of gas. You're paying so many cents of tax to the state of Ohio and so many cents of tax to the federal government. We take that money and we put it into the maintenance of our roads and even building new roads and replacing roads. That is approximately, over the course of the 2 years, billions of dollars, really, at the end of the day. And it really goes towards a lot of jobs out there, a lot of investment in construction industry, et cetera, that we need to have in order to make sure we can get from point A to B in the state of Ohio. So it's not meant to be, most of the time, it's not meant to be a controversial bill that gets people riled up. It's really just to be a bill that authorizes the state to spend those gas tax dollars. And that's really what we ended up with. And I think that's why it was unanimous, is that this was a pretty straightforward transportation budget that stuck to the basics.
One of the things in southern Ohio that you often see when you're running through the hills, pavement slips, hillsides slipping because of erosion. There was $15 million put into an emergency pavement slip repair fund. Important for your district?
Incredibly important for my district, because you're getting down in Appalachia where incomes are lower, smaller counties with less budgets to work off of. So this is a huge deal and has been for quite some time in my district. And the transportation budget is one where it gives all of us an opportunity to talk about and to submit amendments for, things most people wouldn't think about. And I'll just give you a quick example. I think Senator Reineke even submitted this one. It's when the state's going through a small village that has a state route that goes through the middle of it and no stoplight. Well, who's responsible for the snow plowing? And the village says, we don't even have a snow plow. So we got to do things like that where, like, keep your plow down, go through it, salt it, mow the grass if it's there. The village doesn't have that. So
and not build the village for it.
Correct.
Right? Yeah, do that for free. Also, there's some assistance out there for rental car drivers, and you're like, what would the transportation budget have to do with rental car drivers? Well, let's say you happen to get pulled over, and you reach in for the registration in your rental car, and the registration is expired. There's some help for Ohio consumers on that line.
Well, it's always important to make sure that we give the right owner the tools that they need so that they can operate the vehicles, either the rental car owner who owns it or the driver who's driving it, so they're protected.
Also, one thing, Ohio really is the heart of it all when it comes to the economy of the Midwest. And of course, we're a huge transportation hub when you talk about the transportation budget. There are a lot of truck drivers, semi-tractor trailer drivers out there who, if you're driving late at night on 71 or 70 or 75, they're all pulled off trying to find a place to take what is required legally for their rest period. And the transportation budget actually addresses keeping some of the on-ramps or keeping the on-ramps to closed rest areas in Ohio open for parking. Is that an important safety condition?
Oh, I think without question, especially when you consider, with the e-logs now tracking the as soon as the truck starts moving, it starts clicking and talks about how long you're in the truck, how long you're driving. It's a big deal for them to be able to pull off, get some rest. The last thing you want is someone dozing off behind the wheel of a 80,000-pound semi. So,
and
it's very important.
And that is a key. It's not only safety to the tractor trailer drivers, but also to the rest of the public. But clearly, with the amount of truck traffic and just commerce on the interstate highways in Ohio, it's important to have these spaces to make sure commerce keeps rolling.
Absolutely. Ohio is a crossroads for commerce, always has been. I think the statistic is we're within a 6-hour drive of 60% of the population of the country. And so naturally you see across parts of Ohio distribution centers that have popped up because it just makes logistical sense for companies to ship their goods here and then disperse them out from the state of Ohio. We've always had a good amount of truck traffic. I think the Brent Spence Bridge has more freight crossover it every day than any other bridge in the entire country, which is something that's pretty illustrative of the point that I'm making here. But there's also been changes in the trucking industry that requires truck drivers to get off the roads and only spend so many hours consecutively driving. And if that's the reality that they have to confront, what we need to do is make sure that if we have space off the roads, even if it's a rest stop that's closed or that's been decommissioned, if we have parking lot space for them to get off the road and satisfy their federal requirements and also be safe for themselves and other drivers, then it's the least we can do to let them park there.
Senate President Rob McCauley, Senator Shane Wilkins, Senator Bill Reineke. Gentlemen, thanks for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.